Thank you so much for your warm welcome. I'm speaking to you today from Ottawa, where I live and work on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. As Sarah said, my name is Rebecca Murray, and I'm a senior archivist at Library and Archives Canada in our Reference Services Division. My presentation is called Women in the War, Indexing Archival Photographs During COVID. The main intention behind today's presentation is to share my digital research methods, as well as the transition to them, showcase a small portion of this incredible collection of archival photographs, and begin to engage with you about some of my preliminary findings and talk about next steps for the research. So the Second World War was the first time that women officially served in the Canadian military in capacities other than nursing, breaking into roles historically held by men. Did you know that 50,000 Canadian women served in the 3 women's service branches and as military nurses in the Second World War? For a country of 12 million in 1945, this was an extraordinary commitment. To summarize that enrollment, 7,000 women joined the Women's Royal Canadian Naval Service, 21,000 joined the Canadian Women's Army Corps, 17,000 joined the Royal Canadian Air Force's Women's Division, and 4,500 served as military nurses. When I started this indexing project, I envisioned that it would primarily serve to help family members identify their ancestors in photographs held at Library and Archives Canada, but it's become so much more. The experience of reviewing 500,000 photos has challenged and broadened my own historical study and knowledge. Furthermore, the experience of working on this project before and now during a global pandemic has also been a really interesting experience. A few notes as we get started. Today's focus will be on the Navy and Army photos due to the progression of my research. I've included some frequently used abbreviations on this slide, as well as a definition of indexing as it applies to my research. The images used in this presentation vary in terms of quality. I struggled with this decision to share lower quality images with you, but for the purposes of showing you the quality of record that I'm sometimes working with for the research, I felt like it was a good decision. All of these images are open access and held at LAC. A final note before we go forward. Among records professionals, we're talking more and more about the emotional impact of working with archival records. I've made great effort to select images for today's presentation that I sincerely hope will not be triggering or upsetting, but I acknowledge that they may be. For example, I will not be showing any photographs that depict medical procedures. It's important to me to share these stories and records, but also to not re-traumatize anyone in the process, and it can be a delicate balance. And we can chat more about this later if you'd like. LAC holds over 30 million photographs. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to use the word photographs really loosely to refer to graphic material in various formats, like photographic prints, negatives, and photos on microfiche, both analog and digitized. Approximately 500,000 of these photographs are organized within one single accession, 1967-052, in the Department of National Defense Fonds, RG24, R112, and they document the Second World War era. Within these photographs, there are 3 sub-series organized by the branches of the Canadian military, Navy, Army, and Air Force. Within each sub-series of photographs are numerous sub-series within which the individual photographs, classified as items within archival hierarchical terminology, are organized by prefix. Photographs are organized under these prefixes, most often by location, such as military base or city, or by ships in the case of naval photographs. The GM prefix, which I use as an example here, is named for the photographer Gilbert Milne, who took these photos. The items in each prefix or sub-series are described in a tool called a finding aid. You may be familiar with finding aids if you've done archival research. They vary quite a bit though by creator, by type of record they describe, and by format. Most, if not all, of the finding aid material for these photographs was provided by the Department of National Defense upon transfer of the records to LAC. When I first saw the finding aid for the GM prefix, and there's an extract there on the screen, I thought immediately of my Nana. Nana is my late maternal grandmother who served in the Royal Canadian Air Force's Women's Division during the Second World War in Newfoundland. I wondered how many other people like myself have a servicewoman in their family tree who would love to find a photo of that person among the records at LAC. I decided to approach the indexing by branch, starting with the Navy photographs that had first caught my eye. At this early stage of the project, I proceeded slowly but surely, tracking my work in an Excel document. I sat down once a week and with a box of finding aids and read every line carefully, copying out all information relevant to items where the caption included a mention of a servicewoman by name, or more often, by her branch of service. Here's an example of what I started with: the extract from the finding aid, in this case a caption list for the GM prefix, and corresponding entries from my Excel document, and as a bit of a bonus, the photos on digitized microfiche. So this process worked very well for the Navy photographs, and I completed this work between March 2018 and April 2019. I found the Navy photos to include just over 2,600 images of servicewomen, or just over 1%. When we look at the details, we can see the outliers, and it makes a lot of sense why prefixes that document activities and operations in centers like Ottawa, Halifax, and Newfoundland have remarkably higher instances of imagery of servicewomen, as they filled headquarters and shore roles there. On the flip side, there are numerous prefixes that include little to no imagery of servicewomen. These are mostly prefixes that focus on at-sea operations where women wouldn't have been present during this period. Prefixes that document the pre or early war years are also among those that include few to no images of servicewomen, as the women's service branches had not yet been established. Without too much thought or reflection on that first round of indexing, I jumped right into work with the Army photographs. Within this set of photos, there are those organized by prefix as well as those organized numerically. I decided to look first at the Army photographs organized by prefix, and my work proceeded at first quite similarly to the work I'd done with caption lists for the Navy photos. So I'll just remind you of the timeline. This was April 2019. From the caption lists, I ended up indexing just over 900 photos from an approximate total of 55,000, or roughly 2%. Math is not my strong suit, so bear with me. As with the Navy photos, there are outliers, again, mostly from headquarters or command center imagery, and thus where we see more servicewomen represented. So I had the best of intentions for this phase of the research when I started, but due to numerous factors, including both pregnancy and the pandemic, it was really only in January 2021 that I was able to engage with it again on a regular basis. And as you can probably infer, it was in a completely different context. And so I added a column to my Excel sheet to track how I indexed the photographs. For these particular photographs, it meant distinguishing mostly between working with paper or digitized caption lists. And this was a small shift, but a shift nonetheless. The second phase of indexing Army photos focused on the Army numerical sub-series, primarily composed of 110 photo albums, often referred to as the numerical albums, representing approximately 75,000 photographs in print and negative format. I felt they merited their own approach within the scope of the research, and the availability of the albums online during this period when I couldn't access on-site resources reliably made it a really attractive option to pilot indexing from images rather than from a caption list. So here's an example from that work. The example is album 62, which holds just over 1,000 images taken in Sicily during August 1943. You can see an extract from the original album page, my Excel sheet where I've tracked the information, and the corresponding caption list. I've circled 2 caption numbers in the corresponding images so you can have a look. In total, I identified 14 images in the album that include servicewomen and took note of the negative numbers, the caption provided on the page, the date of the photograph, and the photographer's name. Then I looked at the caption list to see if it included any additional information about the servicewomen in these specific images. As it turns out, the caption list identifies all servicewomen pictured by name for 8 of the 14 images that I identified in the album. So just over half. This is a really great scenario, and it illustrates how indexing from printed and digitized images can be really successful in terms of casting a wider net when doing that initial work. With remote work the norm, and at times the only option during 2021 and even early in 2022, I've had to continue to adjust my methods and plans. Although I've been working primarily with digitized photo albums and more recently a set of digitized microfiche from my early work with Air Force photographs, there's still material that's only available in analog format. As such, I finished the Army indexing work in early April 2022. The final overall tally for the numerical photographs was just over 2,700 images, or approximately 4%. Working exclusively with caption lists is a challenge because captions do not always describe or identify all individuals in an image. When looking directly at an image, however, it's usually easy to tell if there are any servicewomen pictured. Further research, such as consulting a caption list or other collection resource material, can help to identify those individuals or provide additional context. Even from early results, it looks like both quality and quantity benefit from working from photos first and caption lists second, due to the relative visibility and identification of servicewomen in both the graphic and textual records. There's a lot more work to do, and my focus right now, once this presentation's over, is to finish the indexing itself, but I also have some preliminary qualitative observations that I'd like to share. The images I've reviewed can be classified into some broad categories that I think will help me as I move forward, beginning to broach questions about how servicewomen are presented in this official photographic record. It's early work though, and I'd be keen to hear your feedback. I think though that it's important to note that these categories are probably very fluid and flux, and there's kind of the edges are not clear. So some photographs could fit into more than one category. So we have portrait or portrait style and formal group photos, stories or series, other on-duty images, off-duty images, and background or extras. I think the majority of images that we're likely already familiar with, those that have been used in the narrative to date, are from groups 1 and 2, photographs that are carefully curated to align with the public's ideas about what's acceptable for women to be doing at home or abroad on behalf of the Canadian Forces. The images that we're probably less familiar with are those that depict less perfectly poised on-duty and off-duty imagery. And what about those images where servicewomen are simply the extras to the main stories or players? Over the next few slides, I'll show a variety of images that I think fit into some of these categories. And yes, this was a favorite photo last time I did a presentation about these images too, which is why it stayed. So we've got portrait and portrait style or formal group photos with, I would argue, a subset of model photos, which I've not included here. It's probably its whole own, at least 20-minute presentation, maybe next year. As I just said, though, these are probably familiar types of images in the sense that even if you haven't studied military history or the period, you've probably seen images that resemble these ones. Poised and posed, safe, fairly formal, no sign of danger whatsoever. And then we've got stories and series, usually focused on duty or safe activities. I wanted to distinguish these photographs from the first group because there's several instances, especially in the numerical photographs, where we see a story. And the word story is actually used in the captions, either perhaps for press use or simply to tell a story. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? Again, the activities are safe, both posed and unposed, but always reassuring and friendly. I also wanted to show here how both an individual image or a story or set of images could fit into this category. Other on-duty images. In this category, I would include imagery where servicewomen are in uniform and performing service duties, but where the images are less obviously or not at all staged. This can be hard to tell, of course, and depending on how the images have been organized or arranged, both intellectually and physically, can contribute to the story they tell. This also ties into the importance of access to originals and not just relying on digitized images out of context of their arrangement. Archival practice is to follow the creator's arrangement where possible, but for practical purposes, for example, nitrate negatives are separated from other negatives or prints physically, but intellectually they're presented together. So how you access a record can really impact what you learn from it. It's not always easy to determine when a servicewoman might truly be off-duty, but after looking at so many images, it's easier for me to see when she's more at ease or relaxed, which I think comes across in these photographs. This makes me think of another factor in all this, the human factor. There's some great pictures that might normally fit in a formal group category, but the women are clearly relaxed, having a good time, and it doesn't look faked. So the levity that they as humans and individuals bring to this imagery and remind us that they are all their own person, it's just another rabbit hole that we could go down in terms of exploring these photographs. So these images include servicewomen both on and off duty. In these three examples, they're wearing their uniforms. But I think it's important to note that it's difficult, dare I say improbable, to identify a servicewoman when she's out of uniform unless the corresponding caption information identifies her. The third image is actually a still from an Army newsreel, which are available on the LAC YouTube channel. But I wanted to include it here as a bit of a teaser and to illustrate that the DND photos that we've been talking about are really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to looking for servicewomen in photographic and audiovisual holdings at LAC. So I'm sure I'm not the only one here who's gotten to a certain point in a research project and thought, oh man, didn't think about that. So when I started in 2018, I was so focused on who I could identify that I didn't stop to think about who might not be represented in these records. And this is only confirmed by the literature. Quite belatedly, I have started a literature review to complement my work with these photographs. I normally suggest that researchers do their secondary research before coming to LAC to look at primary documents. Perhaps I should have taken my own advice to heart. One of the texts that I'm working with right now is Material Traces of War, Stories of Canadian Women in Conflict, 1914 to 1945, by Stacey Barker, Molly McCullough, and Krista Cook. Before embarking on this research and reading this book, it wouldn't have surprised me to learn that the incorporation of women's experiences in the literature was recent. What I did not realize is how recent. So we're talking about my lifetime, perhaps the lifetime of others on this call. This was quite surprising for me. So what's next? My original goal is to, it remains the same. I would like to complete the indexing and get the captions into the hands of researchers. I'm still working on that and exploring different options. But I also want to take it a step further and add to the conversation from my perspective as a granddaughter of someone who served and as an archivist. Something that I might explore is the privilege inherent in being part of these women's service branches, something I had, and I know now naively, never even considered before working with these photographs. Linking that to the representation present or not present in the official photographic record could be a really interesting path for this research. I hope that what I learned from these photographs and other related collections will not only help those hoping to find a photo of their auntie or their grandma in the archives, but to continue to the growing body of work that highlights different voices, or perhaps faces in this case, from a period during which tradition was shifting, making way for future generations of women who served. Shifting gears slightly to bring this back to digital methods, the pandemic has also facilitated, I say us, like my section, but my work as well, connecting with women veterans and advocates across the country. We were able to lead 2 webinars in 2021 about women's military history records held at LAC. I also delivered a similar presentation at an international genealogy conference and published a short webinar on the LAC YouTube channel. We're also leveraging LAC's CoLab tool to try to crowdsource information and identification for individuals in these images. Before the pandemic, I didn't feel like I had these kinds of options in terms of connecting with a wider audience, but the pandemic experience has really pushed us to pivot and explore opportunities. And now that I've seen the potential and gotten to practice adapting content from like typical on-site visits or workshops into live or recorded presentations, it's only been a positive experience, and I'm just so happy with the wider audience we're able to reach. I also want to note that I haven't felt like this transition to primarily digital methods for this research has posed a problem, But that's interesting in and of itself in terms of the availability of these records as opposed to perhaps others. How might my story here today be different if my research topic was a bit more obscure and not already linked to a main theme of the narrative? Many questions to ponder. So I could sit here all day and talk about these photos, but I will stop for now. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and welcome feedback either in the Q&A session or later via email if you'd prefer. Thank you so much.